Look, yes, thank you, Glenn, for that wonderful welcome. I am Helen Waudby and I work with the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, and particularly within the Ecosystems and Threatened Species team within our New South Wales Government Saving Our Species program. And I'm meeting with you today from Wiradjuri land, and Wiradjuri people are also the traditional owners of the land upon which all this work we're talking about tonight on the New South Wales side at least has been done. And look, I'd also like to just, while I get a chance, really thank Glenn and Karen for motivating me and Dave, particularly me, to set this event up for the year and hopefully expand the program over into Victoria on the other side of the Murray River. You know, we don't know a great deal about Sloane's froglet distribution in Victoria. And there's a really great need for us to gain more records and improve our knowledge of this tiny little threatened frog. So thank you very, very much, Glenn and Karen. I really, really appreciate it. And also, just in case I don't, I don't make this clear during the presentation, we are calling for more people to join the Sloane's Champions group, start using the Frog ID app and contributing not just data about Sloane's froglet, but all the other frogs that occur in the local area. But I just want to acknowledge that we do have a core group of Sloane's Champions. We have around, I think, 50 to 60 members at the moment. And they really are champions, as you'll see from some of the records I show later. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you. I know some of you are watching. I really appreciate your efforts and your enthusiasm. You know, I love talking to you in person when we can, or via email. So I just wanted to say a big thank you. But on that, I will get on with the presentation. So just a bit of background on Sloane's froglet, who haven't heard about Sloane's froglet. They're a tiny, tiny threatened frog. So they only get up to about a maximum of 2 centimetres, and they're sort of this olivey greeny brown colour. They really are quite lovely, even though they're quite hard to pick out in wetlands. So they're threatened in New South Wales, but importantly, recently they've been listed under the EPBC Act. So they're actually now threatened at a federal level, so that they are in a spot of trouble. In New South Wales, we used to think that they were they had a fairly broad distribution up into northern New South Wales. But extensive survey work done over many years by Dave Hunter, my colleague, and others, including a researcher from CSU called Alex Knight, have shown that Sloane's froglet is pretty much now only known from a few populations along the Murray River in southern New South Wales. And effectively they are in Albury, around the towns of Albury, so particularly in the suburb of Sagoona, the town of Corowa, the town of Tokemwal, although we actually don't know a great deal about what's happening with Sloane's in Toke, and also sort of a small population along the Murray River corridor from sort of Wonga to Howlong through to Corowa, I suppose. So they really have a very limited distribution. Very little is known about their distribution in Victoria. We don't really know where they're at. And they probably haven't had a lot of publicity in Victoria to date. So it's really fantastic that records are starting to come through on the Victorian side of the side of the river. So they're interesting in that they're a winter breeding frog. Many species breed in spring and summer, but Sloane's froglet actually breeds helpfully in the dead of winter. So that means that Dave and I spend a lot of our time in winter lurking around wetlands at the dead of night, rugged up as much as we possibly can. And I have to say, Glenn, I would love to be able to listen for frogs from a tent in winter, but I'm not sure we'd get away with it. And an important thing about Sloane's froglet is that they really need these wetlands with a very specific sort of plant structure. And we know that because of the work of a researcher, Alex Knight, who I mentioned before, who did her PhD on Sloane's at Charles Sturt University. And they really need wetlands like the one you can sort of see in this image where we have this sort of thin-stemmed vegetation. So common rush or Eleocara acuta is generally favoured, and they occur in these very shallow wetlands that fill in autumn and winter. So this structure is really important because it allows Sloane's froglet to attach their little eggs to the thin vegetation. So if you get sort of thick strappy leaf things like your typha or kumbungi, they don't do as well in those sorts of wetlands, and we don't, generally speaking, don't tend to find them in those sorts of wetlands. Fortunately, they will breed in both natural and artificial wetlands. We've seen around Thaguna particularly that they will start using, for example, stormwater basins if they're built in the right way. And that's important because probably the major threat to Sloane's froglet, as Glenn alluded to before, is this loss of wetland habitat. So loss of these beautiful vegetated shallow wetlands, and that's for a variety of reasons. So as I said before, Sloanes can be very tricky to pick out in a wetland. But the cornerstone of our Saving Our Species program here in New South Wales is this extensive monitoring program that Dave and I conduct annually in winter. Fortunately, male frogs use a call to attract females. You can see this male Sloane's froglet, this great photo by Dave up the top here. So he actually has his vocal sac distended because he's amplifying his voice, trying to be as loud as possible to call for a female Sloane's froglet. So that's very helpful for frog ecologists, because we can use those calls to identify who is calling in a wetland and approximately how many are calling. So Dave and I basically spend most of our time in winter at night listening for this call, which I'll play for you, and hopefully you'll be able to hear it. Dave Hunter, can you hear that? Yeah, good. Okay. So it's a short, sharp sort of It's quite distinctive, fortunately. And so the male is calling for a female, and they end up in this posture called amplexus, where the female is laying her eggs and the male is fertilising them as they're laid. And this is just a little bit of footage of Sloane's froglet in amplexus. And if you have a listen, there's lots of other frogs calling in the background. So there's a the spotted marsh frog going whiny little plains froglet. And I think there was a banjo frog at the beginning going bonk, bonk. So it's a pretty large area that Dave and I need to cover, and we have our regular wetlands that we visit each year. But as I said before, it's really important when you're doing threatened species conservation to know where species are. If you don't know where they are, you can't plan for them, you can't manage them. So it's a big area to cover. So a program that we set up in, I think it was actually 2017, with Woolshed Thaguna Landcare Group and then later Corowa Landcare Group, was the Sloane's Champion Citizen Science Program. And it was basically about engaging the community in learning about Sloane's froglet, because not many people knew that Sloane's froglet occurred in their local community, and also getting the community to help us increase our knowledge of where Sloane's was and possibly wasn't. And in 2019, we expanded that program and partnered with the Australian Museum through its Frog ID app and formally set up Sloane's Champions. So if you want to join that group, all you need to do is download the Frog ID app. You need to log on to Frog ID through your desktop PC, and you can actually search for and join Sloane's Champions under My Groups, and that's how you become a member of Sloane's Champions. So it's a couple of steps, but it is quite straightforward. So we basically encourage our champions to visit wetlands in priority areas, so mostly Corowa and Thaguna, but also now Victoria, and also extending to places like Toke. So we encourage our champions to visit wetlands, record what frogs are calling, That information gets uploaded to the Australian Museum and it eventually comes back to us. So we actually can develop a map or a picture of where Sloane's has been detected. And we use that to inform our local conservation planning. And Sloane's champions are awesome. As I said before, they've submitted nearly 6,800 records since we started with Frog ID in June 2018. It's a huge number of records. Around 20% of those have been of Sloane's Froglet. So we really are increasing our knowledge of where Sloane's is and is not. And I think in a paper Jody and colleagues wrote in 2019, they said that the champions had actually effectively doubled the number of known records of Sloane's Froglet. And 89% of the Sloane's Froglet records that come through Frog ID do come from our core champs. So that's you guys who are joined up to the champions group, if you're listening from the audience. So we do receive other records, Sloane's Froglet, but most of them do in fact come through our champions group. As well as Sloane's Froglet, we've had 13 species detected around Thaguna and Corowa. There's actually a whole bunch of other species that have been detected because our champs can record anywhere at any time. So we've had records from Western Australia. We've had a few recent records that I suspect may have come from CSU's annual desert trip of water-holding frog and knife-footed frog up in northern New South Wales. We get records from Victoria and even Tasmania. So they do.
Helen, you're accidentally muted.
Yeah, I saw that. I've just unmuted myself, I think.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes, I am. Good, thank you. Sorry. Thank you. Battling with technology already. So at our last update to our champions, which I think was April last year, we'd had about 500 Sloane's Froglet, around 550 Froglet records came in through that period. We've had another 574 come in from April 2020 to May 2021, which I just think is incredible considering the restrictions we've all been dealing with. So clearly people have been getting their exercise by going out and recording Sloane's Froglet. So well done and thank you. And this map just gives you a bit of an idea of the Sloane's Froglet records relative to the other species that are coming in. So the little pink triangles, which I hope you can see, are all Sloane's Froglet records. There are a few down here. I think that must be out near Barranduda. We've had a scattering of records around Corowa, and then the bulk of them are in Albury. And it makes sense that the bulk of our records come from the Corowa and Albury areas because they are sort of the core known distribution of Sloane's, but also that's where we tend to ask our champions to focus their efforts. And we've had some interesting records come through. This is a smooth toadlet, Euparolia levigata. They're sort of found in Eastern Australia from Queensland down to Victoria. And their call is a short, squelchy sort of unk, which I will play for you. There's a blue book calling in the back and a parent's. It's kind of a. They breed from September through to April and they attach their eggs to aquatic plants. We've had about 146 champions records of this species from November 2018 through to May 2021. Mostly in spring and summer. So it's great that you guys are getting out there and recording at other times of the year. And they've mostly been turning up on Charles Sturt University grounds and a few other locations. I suspect that's because we have some champions who have favourite wetland haunts. I won't name them, but you know who you are. Some other great records that come through are of the giant banjo frog, Limnodynastes interioris. So this is one that Dave and I regularly get a phone call about. Someone is normally concerned that a cane toad has turned up in the yard, and invariably whenever we get there, it's actually a very large female giant banjo frog looking very confused about why she's been trapped under a bucket. So they're not cane toads, they're just a big colourful frog. So they're mostly found in inland New South Wales and northern Vic, and they have a deep hollow sort of bonk. I call it like a double bonk bonk. You can hear it sort of deep and hollow. It's different from the other banjo frog. They breed mostly September through to November, and they lay this sort of foamy mass amongst the vegetation. You'll often see those floating foamy masses in the vegetation. They're often Limnodynasty species. So we have 146 records from the champions up until May 2021, so mostly from spring to summer, as I said. We have a few records from North Albury and a few in Corowa, but interestingly, I was looking at the map today, and we've been getting a lot from a location that seems to be near Corrine. I'm not sure if it's actually in the township of Corrine or nearby, but to me it looks like the work of one person. I hope you've called in if it's you, but that's fantastic work, thank you. There's a whole bunch of records coming in from this one tiny area, not far, sort of north of Corowa. And this is another one that we get a few records of, the eastern banjo frog, Limnodynastes jumerlii. They're very common in southeastern Australia. They spread up into Queensland as well. And they have a resonating sort of hollow bonk, which is why they're sometimes called the banjo frog. And you can hear it's not quite as deep or as resonating as the giant banjo frog. It is more like a banjo being plucked. So they breed mostly in spring and autumn, and again, they lay eggs in this sort of foamy mass that floats amongst the vegetation. So we've had 111 champions records up until May 2021, and they've mostly come from the Thurgoona and Corowa areas. And then this one is a favourite of everyone, Perrin's tree frog, and Glenn reminded me that I should actually include this species in my slides, so thanks Glenn. So they're sometimes called the emerald spotted tree frog or maniacal cackle frog. That's because they have this loud sort of cackling noise. And often when people are describing this frog to us that hangs around the air conditioning vent or that they see on the wall of the house outside, it's usually Perrin's tree frog. And you can see they have these beautiful little yellow sections, these tiny emerald green spots, and this sort of star-shaped iris. They're very beautiful. So they're another spring summer breeding frog. We get quite a lot of records for the champions of them. Around 446 to date, mostly in Albury, but strangely none recorded in Corowa, even though they are most definitely there. So I'm not sure what that's about. And then this one is another very interesting one, which I think Jodie might be talking a little bit more about, the eastern dwarf tree frog, or sedge frog. It's sometimes called Latoria felix. So it's mostly found on the eastern coast, but there are some small introduced naturalised populations in Kiwa, the Barranduda and the Osborne's Flat areas, and there's a small population north of Melbourne. So it also breeds in spring or summer, but it's recently been recorded in Albury, and actually it was the Sloane's Champions group that started revealing the first records of the species turning up here. So it has quite a lovely call. It's a beautiful call. And they're a beautiful frog, they're tiny. And they're sometimes referred to as one of these banana box frogs. So they get transported around quite easily in fruit boxes and probably by the nursery trade. So you guys, the champions, have actually been providing the baseline data to see what's happening with this population over time. So At the last meeting we had, so April last year, I think there had been around 20 records. So that's doubled to 44 now. So a few more records, mostly in spring and summer, mostly still on Charles Sturt University grounds around the David Mitchell wetlands, but also at a site sort of east of the Kinross Hotel, which I need to go check out because I'm actually not 100% sure what's there. So I think Karen was going to chime in and just talk a little bit about Sloanes in Wodonga.
Okay. Thanks, Helen, and hi, everyone. This is a little bit of a teaser for those of you who are perhaps hanging out on the Wodonga side of the Murray River. Just wanted to give you a snapshot, zeroing in a little closer. So these are verified record locations for Sloanes around Wodonga, and just kind of want to point out that they're at Barranduda, they're in the Kiewa River floodplain, so including at Killara, near Yak Creek, and at Ryan's Lagoon. And then across town, we've got some records confirmed in West Wodonga. So for example, the floodplain that's sort of adjacent to Wodonga Creek is quite an interesting place. So these are a bit of a mix of both private and public land. And I'm hoping that this is going to highlight the potential at many other locations. And we're hoping that we'll get some more people helping to investigate in Wodonga and indeed in Victoria more broadly.
Fantastic. Thanks, Karen. And I think these records just really show the value of the Sloanes Champions program. And I think there have even been records from around Wang and possibly Karen thinks she's picked them up in Chiltern and Rutherglen too. So that's fantastic. And look, a little bit of friendly rivalry is always a good thing. So I always like to see how Corowa versus Albury is going. It's like the footy championships, I guess. So at the moment, Corowa is at 7 frog species, Albury's at 13. So Corowa, a little bit of catching up to do. You can do it. I believe in you. Perrin's tree frog is an easy one to add. I should add, though, I'm not picking on Corowa. When you look at the records that come through from Corowa, the vast majority of them are of Sloane's Froglet. So you guys are actually doing a fantastic job of increasing our knowledge of how Sloane's is doing in Corowa. So the number of frog ID records that have come in from Corowa are now 100. It was actually 99, but there was one a bit on the edge of the priority area, so I included it. So you're in triple figures now. Well done. So that's up from 70. And in Thaguna, we're sitting at around 2,570 verified frog ID records. So that's up from 1,500 in April last year. So well done to all of you. I'm pretty amazed at how well you've done, considering the types of restrictions we've all been living with in the last little while. And as I said before, other notable locations include Corrine, or an area sort of near Corrine, with nearly 191 records and 6 species, which is just amazing. And I do suspect it's the work of 1 or 2 people. So yeah, if you ever want to reach out and let me know who you are, please feel free, because I think that's awesome. So this season's focus, welcome Wodonga and Victoria. We really hope that you'll get on board and be keen to join the champs and start recording Sloane's Froglet, hopefully all over Wodonga and surrounds. In New South Wales, we'd like, as far as Sloane's Froglet goes, for you guys to continue focusing on the Albury and Corowa areas. And I'm hoping we have some listeners from Tokemwal or near Tokemwal, and that you guys might be interested in getting involved, because we really need more frog ID records coming in from that area. Of course, in Victoria, everywhere is of interest. So please feel free to record wherever you go, as all champs should. Feel free to visit all sorts of wetlands. So they don't just have to be natural creeks or swamps. Visit created wetlands like stormwater basins, dams, all sorts of sites are of interest. Repeat visits to wetlands in a season are really good. You don't have to just visit it once and then let it go. It's sometimes great to adopt a wetland that you visit every few weeks or so, and that sort of builds a picture for us of what's occurring there, what frogs are calling there over time. And while the Sloane's core breeding season is in winter, so that's when we mostly ask our champs to really focus their wetland visiting efforts, we'd really appreciate it if people were keen to get out there and start recording and listening for the eastern dwarf tree frog, Latoria phalanx. We really want to know a bit more about this species distribution in the local area and what it's doing. And at the moment, you guys, the current champs, are providing pretty much all the information we have on that species distribution in the area. So please, if you're up to it, get out there and start recording. And just finally, from me, the champs, our current champs will remember that top-end toadbusters were our nemesis in the previous year. They were sitting at number 2 or number 3, and it was our mission to knock them off their perch, particularly as they don't even have a profile picture. And look at that, we did. So we've now beat top-end toadbusters. However, somehow we've fallen to position 4, rank 4. Really, it's rank 3 because I'm pretty certain that James's test group is a bit of a dodgy, you know. So really, it's probably number 3. But what we want to do is go from there to there, please. So our new nemesis are the Blue Mountains Frogs Friends. They also don't have a profile picture, so I'm not sure how professional they are. So let's try and knock them off their perch and move up a level. So to do it, all you need to do is go online, log in and join the Sloane's Froglet, Sloane's Champions group and start recording. Bother your friends and family till they join as well. Do repeat visits to wetlands and feel free to record all year. And again, thank you so much to all of these groups who have been major supporters of Sloane's Champions, and particularly to the Frog ID in the Australian Museum and Woolshed Thaguna Landcare Group and Corowa Landcare Group. You guys are amazing. Thank you.